Welcome to our overview of the federal supplement not supplant requirement as it applies to federal education programs authorized under the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA. This presentation is intended solely to provide general information and guidance to Texas local education agencies and reflects the Texas Education Agency's current understanding of the presentation topics and applicable federal guidance. The content of this presentation is subject to change as a result of further potential information and guidance provided by the federal agencies with regulatory oversight of these programs. This presentation does not constitute legal advice, and LEAs are therefore advised to seek legal counsel regarding the information and guidance provided in this presentation before acting on such information and guidance. First, let's go over some of the resources that are available. In June of 2019, the U.S. Department of Education issued a non-regulatory informational document that provided guidance in several key areas and helped to clarify some of the logistical issues that have been raised as local education agencies, or LEAs, implemented the Every Student Succeeds Act. The Texas Education Agency used this guidance document to revise its Supplement Not Supplant handbook, which is available on the agency's website. The revised handbook provides a quick reference chart on pages 2 and 3 that lists the federal education programs and the corresponding statutory citation for each program's Supplement Not Supplant provision. The chart also lists the specific wording of each Supplement Not Supplant provision. It's a little different for each program, and those differences can have a big impact. For example, some programs, like Title II Part A, are only required to supplement non-federal funds, while funds under Title III Part A are required to supplement both federal and non-federal funds. We have also clarified in our handbook that the ESSER statute has no supplement not supplant provision. Supplement not supplant is a term that we use a lot, and we sometimes forget in these presentations that it is important to cover the basic purpose of the provision in statute. The purpose of the supplement not supplant provision is to help ensure that federal grant funds are expended to benefit the intended population, not diverted to cover expenses that the LEA would have paid out of other funds in the event that the federal program funds were not available. Most federal programs with a supplement not supplant provision still use traditional documentation. This means that the LEA must have documentation that shows that the program activities expand, enhance, or extend the required activities. This traditional documentation looks at the activities that are paid with state and local funds as if those were the base layer of a cake. Federal program activities that are required to supplement the state and local activities are like the icing on the cake. Program participants receive the cake as well as the icing. We wouldn't expect the icing to replace the cake. Programs like Title III Part A, which are required to supplement federal as well as non-federal funds, would be like cherries on top of the icing, which is on top of the cake. When the Every Student Succeeds Act introduced the Supplement Not Supplant methodology as a way to document compliance with the SNS provision for Title I Part A and Title I School Improvement, it required something of a paradigm shift. The Supplement Not Supplant requirement did not go away, but for Title I Part A and Title I School Improvement, the focus of the documentation moved away from the activity level where it had always been, and where it remains for those programs that use traditional ways of documenting supplement not supplant requirements. For Title I Part A and Title I School Improvement, once the LEA has documented how it allocates its state and local funds to campuses, any Title I Part A or Title I School Improvement funds that are allocated to those campuses are considered to be supplemental. The Supplement Not Supplant Handbook discusses both the traditional SNS documentation in Section A and the Title I Part A methodology documentation in Section B. Programs that use the traditional Supplement Not Supplant documentation include Title I Part C, Title I Part D Subpart 1, Title II Part A, Title III Part A, Title IV Part A, Title IV Part B, the Rural and Low-Income School Program, IDEA, Perkins, and the McKinney-Vento Program. Programs that are covered by the Supplement Not Supplant methodology are Title I Part A and Title I School Improvement. We will come back to the Supplement Not Supplant methodology documentation in a few minutes. But first, let's review the traditional Supplement Not Supplant documentation requirement, which is still in place for most federal programs that have a Supplement Not Supplant provision. So just to recap, the programs that use traditional Supplement Not Supplant documentation are Title I Part C, Title I Part D Subpart 1, Title II Part A, Title III Part A, Title IV Part A, Title IV Part B, the Rural and Low-Income Schools Program, IDEA, Perkins, and the McKinney-Vento Program. For these programs, the traditional Supplement Not Supplant documentation is looking at the service or activity level. The state and LEAs can use these program funds only to supplement and not to supplant the services or activities provided with non-federal sources. Please note that because of the way the statute is written, Title III Part A and the Rural and Low-Income Schools Program must also be supplemental to other federal funds. There is an additional Supplement Not Supplant provision for the rural and low-income schools and the small rural school achievement funds. If the activity is one that would ordinarily be covered with other federal, state, or local funds, for example, in most cases, the standard textbook purchases would ordinarily be covered with state or local funds. In this case, the LEA would have to rebut a presumption of supplanting through written contemporaneous documentation, for example, state or local legislative action, budget information, school board minutes, or other materials, that it would not be able to fund the particular activity in the absence of the RLIS or the SRSA funds. If you've heard us talk about Supplement Not Supplant before, you've probably heard us talk about the traditional presumptions of supplanting. An auditor will presume that supplanting occurs if the LEA has used federal funds to provide services or activities that are required by state or local law, to provide the same services or activities as those provided in the prior school year with state or local funds, or to provide the same services or activities in federal and non-federal programs. It is possible to rebut the presumptions of supplanting, but the responsibility for providing the documentation for this falls entirely on the LEA. Examples of appropriate documentation might be documentation of a rescission of funds or a budget reduction, or documentation that the fund source previously used for an activity or service is no longer available. The key is that the documentation must be written and it must be contemporaneous, which is a $10 word for saying that the documentation must be from the time of the event, not created after the fact. There are some standard questions the LEA should ask when making supplement not supplant determinations. The first question should always be, what program is involved? If it's a program that uses traditional supplement not supplant documentation, the LEA should then ask the following questions. Is the activity or service required by state or local law? Did the LEA provide this activity or service in the prior year? Did the LEA previously use non-federal funds to provide this activity or service? Is the activity or service provided with federal funds to some recipients and with state and local funds to other recipients? If the answer to any of these questions is yes, the LEA should consider whether it may need to rebut a presumption of supplanting, or perhaps use a different fund source. Next, we will go over a few scenarios where the programs involve traditional supplement not supplant documentation. There will be opportunities for you to pause the recording after each question in case you want to engage in discussions locally before going over the answer. So question 1, is it allowable for Title II Part A funds to be used for the reading academies? So we'll give you a hint. What's the first question you should ask? What program is involved? So what program is involved in this particular question? Title II Part A. So then what question should we ask next? Is this a state requirement? In this case, the program involved is Title II Part A. Title II Part A follows the traditional supplement not supplant documentation and presumptions of supplanting. So traditional supplement not supplant requirements preclude Title II Part A funds from being used from the reading academies in the instances where the academies are a state requirement. Therefore, the only instance where the academies may be considered allowable under Title II Part A is if the LEA wants to provide training to non-K through 3 teachers. The House Bill 3 state requirement applies only to principals and K through 3 teachers. Okay, question 2 on your self-check. May migrant education program funds be used to pay for meals and snacks for migratory students on field trips? In this question, the program involved is Title I Part C, which follows the traditional supplement not supplant documentation. The answer to this question deals with several other issues other than supplement not supplant. In other words, it's the complete answer to this question. If there are no other resources available, migrant education program funds may be used to pay for the costs of food while migratory children are participating in the field trip. The LEA must consider the following when determining if they may use migrant education funds for a particular activity or instruction or support service. The activity or service comports with the results of the state's Comprehensive Needs Assessment, or CNA, and the strategies outlined in the State Service Delivery Plan, or SDP. Migrant education program funds must first be used to meet the identified needs of migratory children that result from their migratory lifestyle and to permit these children to participate effectively in school. The activity or service meets the needs of migratory children that are not addressed by services available from other federal or non-federal programs. And here is the part that is specific to Supplement, not Supplant. Migrant education program funds are used to supplement rather than supplant the use of state and local funds. In other words, the LEA cannot pay for migrant students with migrant funds and all other students with state and local funds. Question 3 on your self-check. An LEA wants to use its Title III Part A funds to certify teachers who are on a bilingual exception or ESL waiver. Is this allowable? Title III Part A funds cannot be used to certify teachers who are on a bilingual exception or ESL waiver because such a certification is a state requirement. Title III Part A funds can be used to build the capacity of bilingual and/or ESL certified staff above state requirements. Before doing so, however, the LEA should ensure that no federal, state, or local funds were used to provide this service in the prior year. Let's look now at the documentation that's required for the Title I Part A SNS methodology. It's really important to remember that the Supplement Not Supplant methodology only documents Supplement Not Supplant compliance for Title I Part A and Title I School Improvement. Title I Part A statute says that local education agencies must use funds received under Title I Part A only to supplement state and local funds and not to supplant them. The Title I Part A statute also makes very clear that a local education agency may not be required to identify that an individual cost or service supported with Title I Part A funds is supplemental. Remember what we said earlier about Title I Part A shifting the way we look at Supplement Not Supplant compliance. Title I Part A doesn't look at the activity level anymore. It looks at the allocation of state and local funds to campuses. Once the state and local funds are allocated to campuses according to the Supplement Not Supplant methodology, any Title I Part A funds that campuses receive are considered to be supplemental. Every LEA that accepts Title I Part A or Title I School Improvement funds must document compliance with the SNS requirement by having either a written methodology for allocating its state and local funds, or by having a written statement of exemption from the methodology requirement. Templates for the Supplement Not Supplant methodology, as well as the statement of exemption, are available in the Supplement Not Supplant handbook. The primary requirement for the Title I Part A Supplement Not Supplant methodology is that the LEA allocates state and local funds to its campuses without regard to the campus's Title I Part A status. This means that however the LEA decides to distribute its state and local funds to its campuses, the methodology must be Title I Part A neutral. And now we come to what is perhaps the most difficult part of this shift in mindset. The traditional presumptions of supplanting, which we have been accustomed to using for the last 50 to 60 years, do not apply to Title I Part A. Let me say that one more time. The traditional presumptions of supplanting do not apply to Title I Part A under the Every Student Succeeds Act. So what does this do to your list of questions that you're supposed to ask when you're planning? The first question you're always supposed to ask is what program is involved. You should still ask that question first, because you need to know whether you're dealing with Title I Part A or whether you're dealing with a program that follows the traditional presumptions of supplanting. So the first question should still be, what program is involved? If the answer to that question is Title I Part A or Title I School Improvement, then the LEA should ensure that it has either a valid written methodology for distributing its state and local funds to its campuses, or it should have a valid statement of exemption. If this requirement is met, the supplemental nature of the Title I Part A or Title I School Improvement funds is established, and the LEA should then go on to consider the other items on the Title I Part A use of funds document. But the question about supplement not supplant should be done. So now let's apply that to one of the scenarios that we have related to Title I Part A. Is it allowable for Title I Part A funds to be used for the reading academies? Is it allowable for Title I Part A funds to be used for the reading academies? Remember, what should your first question be? What program is involved? What program is involved? Title I Part A. And so what should you check next? Do you get to ask if this is a state requirement? No, you don't get to ask that question, because Title I Part A doesn't follow the traditional presumptions of supplanting. Let's look at the answer. The LEA meets the supplement not supplant requirement for Title I Part A by having a written methodology for allocating its state and local funds to its campuses, or by having a valid statement of exemption. The LEA does not apply the traditional presumptions of supplanting to Title I Part A activities. The LEA would work through the other items on the Title I Part A use of funds one-pager to ensure that the activity is identified in the comprehensive needs assessment, is included in the district improvement plan or the campus improvement plan, that the LEA is meeting the EDGAR requirements, and that the activity is aligned with the LEA's policies and procedures. Now that we have covered a few scenarios for both the traditional documentation for supplement not supplant, as well as the Title I Part A supplement not supplant methodology, let's move on to a few more questions that will let you practice determining which set of questions to apply. Again, there will be opportunities for you to pause the recording in case you want to engage in discussions locally before going over the answers to the questions posed. Now for question 5 on your self-check. We were granted the mentor allotment last year and were able to pay for mentor stipends. This year, we were not granted the allotment, so may we go back to paying the stipends with Title II funds as in previous years? We were granted the mentor allotment last year and were able to pay for mentor stipends. This year, we were not granted the allotment, so may we go back to paying the stipends with Title II funds as in previous years. So remember what your first question should be. What programs are involved? In this question, we're talking about Title II Part A funds, but we're also talking about the mentor allotment. The mentor allotment was part of the state allocation. This would be an example of where the LEA would want to keep documentation showing that the state fund source that had been used is no longer available. This could be done through minutes from a board meeting or from a budget report or from the summary of finances. This would be what an auditor would want to see in order for the LEA to successfully rebut the presumptions of supplanting. Can Title II Part A split fund costs with Title I Part A, since Title I Part A funds can only cover the cost of Title I Part A schools? Can Title II Part A split fund costs with Title I Part A, since Title I Part A funds can only cover the cost of Title I Part A schools? So what programs are involved? We have Title II Part A and Title I Part A. And since they follow different documentation requirements, the answer may get a little complicated. Let's take each program separately. It would not be a supplanting issue for Title II Part A funds to replace Title I Part A funds, or vice versa, because those statutes only require the federal funds to supplement state and local funds. They're not required to supplement other federal funds. However, the LEA would want to ensure that the individual program requirements were met. For example, the LEA would need to ensure that it could document that Title II Part A funds have been prioritized to meet the needs at the campuses that have been identified for school improvement and campuses that have the highest percentage of low-income students. If Title II Part A funds remain after that, then this could be an allowable activity if it meets with LEA policies and procedures. Title I Part A funds could be used as long as the use of funds requirement for Title I Part A funds are met. For example, identifying this is a need in the comprehensive needs assessment, that the activity is included in the LEA or campus plan, that it's in line with the EDGAR requirements and local policies. If these are Title I Part A funds that have been reserved at the LEA level, they would need to be used in accordance with the activities approved in the LEA's Consolidated Federal Grant application. Question 7 on your self-check. May the LEA use Title IV Part A funds to purchase cardiopulmonary resuscitation mannequins for student training? So what fund source is involved here? Title IV Part A. And does Title IV Part A follow the traditional presumptions of supplanting, or does it follow the SNS methodology? It follows the traditional. So what should your next question be? Is this a state requirement? This activity would not be considered supplemental, as it is required in state law. Using Title IV Part A funds for this activity would be considered supplanting. Student training is required in the Texas Education Code Section 28.0023. Staff training is required in Texas Education Code Section 22.902. Question 8 on our self-check. Can Title I Part A funds be used to pay the salary of a campus principal? Can Title I Part A funds be used to pay the salary of a campus principal? Because Title I Part A documents compliance with the supplement not supplant requirement through the written methodology for distributing state and local funds, it would not be considered supplanting for Title I Part A funds to pay for a campus principal's salary. However, just because it's not a supplant does not mean that it's an allowable use of funds. The LEA must also consider the other items in the use of funds guidance. The intent and purpose of Title I Part A is to provide all children significant opportunity to receive a fair, equitable, and high-quality education and to close educational achievement gaps. An LEA would be hard-pressed to justify that paying a principal's salary meets that purpose. Question 9 on our self-check. Can an LEA use Title I Part C funds to provide supplemental instructional materials to migratory students who are dual identified as English learners, and Title III Part A funds to provide supplemental instructional materials to English learners who are not migratory? There are two potential issues here. First, Title III Part A is required to supplement federal as well as state and local funds. Therefore, split funding the supplemental instructional materials for English learners with Title III Part A and any other fund source could be considered supplanting. The second issue is a program eligibility issue rather than a supplement not supplant issue. Migratory students are to receive services from any program for which they are eligible, in addition to any services they receive because of their migratory status. A dual identified migratory student who is an English learner is eligible for any Title III Part A direct services an LEA provides, including supplemental instructional materials. The Title I Part C funds would be used to provide other services that result from the student's migratory status. Question 10 on our self-check. House Bill 4545 requires local education agencies to provide supplemental tutoring to students who do not pass the state assessment. What are the implications of this for our federal programs. The supplemental instruction requirements established under House Bill 4545 are extensive, and local education agencies must review them carefully to ensure that the services provided with federal education funds are not supplanting. So what are the implications for our federal programs? The answer to this question is going to depend on the supplement not supplant language in each program's statute. For example, for Title IV Part A, which must supplement state and local funds, and which follows traditional SNS documentation requirements, an LEA would have to document that any tutoring provided to students with Title IV Part A funds is in addition to the House Bill 4545 requirements. Migratory students would be eligible for this supplemental tutoring on the same basis as any other students. Providing state-required tutoring with Title I Part C funds would be a supplant. English learners would be eligible for supplemental tutoring under House Bill 4545 on the same basis as any other students, and may also receive Title III funded supplemental instructional materials for the purpose of language development. By contrast, if the LEA has a written supplement not supplant methodology for allocating its state and local funds, or a valid statement of exemption, using Title I Part A funds to provide the state-required tutoring would not be considered supplanting. However, the LEA would have to ensure that the Title I Part A funds are used only for Title I Part A students and that all other use of funds items are met. Question 11 on our self-check. An LEA has been using Title IV Part A funds to provide supplemental art and music classes under the goal of providing access to a well-rounded education for all students. What are the potential ramifications of moving that activity to the Title I Part A program? First, there would be no issue of supplanting here because both Title IV Part A and Title I Part A are only required to supplement state and local funds. One potential issue that the LEA might need to consider is that all students would be eligible for such a program under Title IV Part A, but only Title I Part A students would be eligible if the program were funded under Title I Part A. If all of the LEA's campuses are Title I school-wide, this would not be a problem. But if the LEA has some Title I school-wide campuses and some non-Title I campuses, the students at the non-Title I campuses would not be able to participate. Likewise, if the LEA has a targeted assistance campus, only those students who are identified as Title I eligible would be able to participate. The LEA would need to ensure that the activity was identified in the Comprehensive Needs Assessment, was described in the district or campus improvement plans, and met the other items in the Title I Part A Use of Funds Guidance document. Question 12 on our self-check. An LEA wants to use Title II Part A funds to send one of its teachers to a 2-day training out of state to learn how to conduct formative assessments, because the principal saw a speaker recently at a conference and thought the speaker was great. Another teacher will be sent to a local university for a similar training, but the LEA plans to use local funds for that. What issues should the LEA consider before these trainings occur? Question 12 on our self-check. An LEA wants to use Title II Part A funds to send one of its teachers to a 2-day training out of state to learn how to conduct formative assessments because the principal saw a speaker recently at a conference and thought the speaker was great. Another teacher will be sent to a local university for a similar training, but the LEA plans to use local funds for that. What issues should the LEA consider before these trainings occur? Oh, there are so many issues here. You can see, especially in a question like this, that supplement not supplant is only one of the things an LEA has to consider when determining whether a cost is allowable. From a supplement not supplant perspective, why is one training being paid with state and local funds and one training being paid with Title II Part A? If they're similar trainings, this has the appearance of a supplant. From a program perspective, although training on assessments can be an allowable Title II Part A activity, does this training meet the ESSA definition of professional development? Is this a standalone training, or is it actually part of a larger professional development plan for the teacher? And finally, if the LEA is going to send the teacher to an out-of-state training, there is a form to complete and maintain locally for documentation. From an EDGAR perspective, is an out-of-state training reasonable and necessary if a similar training is available locally? Another important resource for LEAs is the program staff at your Regional Education Service Center. We train the Education Service Center staff in the program requirements as we develop the training for LEAs, so they are a good place to start when you have questions. They are familiar with the frequently asked questions documents and web resources, and they can often help you with answers to your questions more quickly than waiting for a return call or email from us. Questions related to supplement non-supplant may be directed to vivian.smurl@tea.texas.gov or to the division's email address at essasupport@tea.texas.gov. We do our best to respond to your calls and emails within 48 hours. We're always looking for questions to add to our frequently asked questions document.